I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this whole situation didn't add up. The HOA acted like they owned the lake, like they had complete authority over who could use it. But the more I thought about it, the more I questioned that. I'd lived in the neighborhood for years. I'd never once seen a sign saying the lake was HOA property. No fences. No private property markers. Just open water surrounded by trees and a gravel path. It was always treated like part of the natural landscape, not like something controlled by a board of neighbors with clipboards and petty rules. So I started looking into it. Nothing too serious at first. I just Googled the lake's name, trying to find any public records or land ownership info. What I found shocked me. The lake wasn't listed under the HOA's name at all. In fact, it was shown as privately owned land, not public, not government, and definitely not HOA controlled. That's when I realized the HOA had been acting like they owned something they didn't. I went to the county records office the next day, just to be sure. I asked for all the documents related to the property surrounding the lake. Took a little time, but when the clerk brought out the file, there it was in black and white. The lake was privately owned. And even better, the owner had listed it for sale. It was right there. An old, quiet listing that hadn't gotten much attention. No one had bought it. It was still available. Couldn't believe it. The same lake I got fined for using was actually on the market. My heart started racing. What if I bought it? What if I turned the tables on the very people who thought they had power over me? The idea started as a joke in my head. But the longer I sat with it, the more serious it became. I called the number on the listing. The seller picked up right away. He was an older guy who had inherited the land years ago and didn't have any use for it anymore. He told me the property had been on the market for months with no real interest. Most people didn't want to deal with a body of water that didn't come with development permits. But I didn't care about development. I cared about sending a message. I met him that weekend. He gave me a full walkthrough of the property lines, showed me where the lake began and ended. We signed a preliminary agreement right there, sitting on a log by the water. I put in an offer just under the asking price. He accepted it without hesitation. All I had to do was finalize the paperwork. To be honest, I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept spinning. I kept thinking about the moment I'd show the deed to the HOA board. The thought of their faces when they realized they'd find the wrong person? Priceless. The process took a few weeks, but I stayed quiet about it the entire time. I didn't tell neighbors. I didn't post about it online. I didn't even bring it up at the next HOA meeting. I wanted everything official first. I wanted no loopholes, no arguments. And once the papers were signed and the title was mine, I stood there at the edge of the lake, holding the deed. I looked across the water, the same lake where I'd been fined for floating peacefully in my boat, and I smiled. Because now I didn't just own the boat. I owned the whole lake. Once everything was finalized, I didn't waste any time. The moment the ink dried on the paperwork, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I made copies of the deed. I highlighted the key parts, the name of the property, the boundaries, and of course my name listed as the new legal owner. Then I printed out a letter addressed directly to the HOA board. It was polite, professional, and very clear. It started with asterisk as of /date. The lake in question is now private property under my ownership. Any use of this property, including walking trails, events, or water access, now requires written permission from me. Asterisk. I signed it, attached the deed, and dropped it off at the HOA office with a straight face. No drama, no yelling, just facts. I walked out and went home like it was a normal day. But inside, I was practically laughing. For years, the HOA had treated the lake like it was theirs. They scheduled events around it. They even advertised it in the neighborhood brochure as one of the community features. That same lake they said I wasn't allowed to use? It had been their little trophy. But now it was mine. I waited to see how they'd react. A few days went by. Then a week. Silence. No response. No letter. No email. Nothing. But I knew they got it. I had dropped it off myself. Then one morning, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. I was out walking my dog when I noticed a group of HOA members near the lake. They had their folding chairs set up. Someone brought snacks. A couple of them were wearing shirts with the HOA logo, like it was some kind of official gathering. They were using the lake, my lake, without permission, like nothing had changed. That's when I made my next move. I contacted a lawyer, the same one who helped with the property purchase. I explained everything, showed him the documents, and told him about the unauthorized use. He gave me a look I'll never forget. Half amused, half impressed. Then he helped me draft a legal notice, a formal cease and desist letter, along with a warning that any future use of the lake without my written consent would result in a trespassing fine. The amount? $1 million. I wasn't playing around anymore. We delivered the letter directly to the HOA president's house. Hand-delivered, signed and witnessed. And just like that, the game flipped. First, there was confusion, then panic. I started getting phone calls, voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, emails from board members asking to discuss the issue. Some even tried to play nice. "Let's work something out," they said. "Maybe we can come to a fair agreement." Now they wanted to talk. I ignored them for a few days, let them sit with it, let them feel what it was like to be powerless. The same feeling they gave me when they handed me that $5,000 fine without warning. It didn't take long before a full emergency meeting was scheduled. I didn't attend, but I heard through a neighbor that things got heated. Board members were arguing. Some of them didn't even know the lake wasn't part of the HOA's official assets. They just assumed it was. Turns out, the whole rule they used to fine me? Built on a lie. They had no right to enforce anything on that lake. Not then. Not now. And yet, they did. Until I bought it. After that letter, things changed fast. It was like I had flipped the whole neighborhood upside down. People who used to avoid eye contact with me were suddenly waving when I walked by. Some neighbors even knocked on my door, curious, asking if the rumors were true. I didn't say much. I just smiled and told them to ask the HOA. Behind the scenes, the board was in damage control mode. They weren't used to being challenged. For years, they'd operated like a small-town government with no checks and balances. Now they were scrambling. A few of them tried to pretend nothing had happened. But the smarter ones knew this wasn't going away. One morning, I got another letter in the mail, this time from the HOA's attorney. It was full of legal jargon, but the message was simple. They were requesting a meeting to resolve the issue amicably. They wanted to negotiate access to the lake. I read it twice and laughed out loud. Just weeks earlier, they fined me $5,000 without warning. Now they wanted my permission to use the water. I decided not to respond right away. Let them sweat a little more. Meanwhile, I visited the lake almost every day. Not to boat, not even to fish. Just to walk around it. Just to be present. A few times I saw HOA members nearby, and they'd awkwardly turn away or pretend to be on their phones. The same people who once acted like the kings of the community couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Then came the event that pushed everything over the edge. The HOA had planned a summer gathering months earlier. A big one. Flyers had been sent out. There would be food trucks, live music, and, of course, lake activities. Kayaking, paddle boarding, all the usual stuff. But there was one problem. They hadn't asked me for permission. I waited until the week before the event. Then I had my lawyer send another letter. This time it was direct and firm. No lake access would be allowed. Any use of the property would be considered trespassing. And yes, the $1 million fine still stood. The fallout was instant. They had to cancel the entire event. Refunds had to be issued. Vendors pulled out. Residents were confused and annoyed. And when people started asking why, the truth came out. That's when the emails started rolling in. Not from the board, but from regular neighbors. Some angry, some supportive, many just curious. They couldn't believe that after all the HOA's posturing, they didn't even own the lake. They had lied or at the very least never bothered to check. And they used that false authority to fine me and probably others too. I decided it was time to make a few things clear. I wrote a short message and posted it on the community bulletin board and the private neighborhood app. No bragging, no insults. Just a simple statement. *, the lake is now private property. I purchased it legally. From this point on, any use requires my direct permission. This is not revenge. It's a reminder that power without accountability has consequences. Asterisk. That message hit harder than I expected. People started talking. A few board members resigned quietly. Others tried to save face. But the damage was already done. The whole neighborhood now knew what had happened, and more importantly, why. They saw how quickly things could change when someone decides not to be pushed around. Things didn't go back to normal after that. In fact, they were far from normal. But something had definitely shifted. The balance of power that the HOA held for years had cracked. People who used to stay quiet during meetings were now asking real questions. Not just about the lake, but about everything. Dues, rules, decisions. Suddenly nothing was off limits. A week after I posted my message, someone printed it and brought it to the next HOA meeting. Word for word. I wasn't there, but a neighbor told me the room went silent when it was read out loud. The board didn't even argue. What could they say? I wasn't breaking rules. I wasn't causing trouble. I just played by the system they thought they controlled, and I won. But the thing is, I didn't do all of this just to win. I did it to prove a point. They could have avoided all of it. If someone had just treated me with a little fairness from the start, I never would have gone looking through property records. I never would have bought the lake. I never would have written that $1 million fine. But they pushed and pushed and pushed until they found out I pushed back harder. The funny part? After everything, I still loved that lake. Not just because I owned it, but because of what it stood for now. It wasn't just water and trees. It was proof that one person could stand up, dig a little deeper, and turn the tables when something felt wrong. I started keeping it clean, walking the trails, making sure no one dumped trash. A few neighbors asked if they could help, and I said sure. I didn't mind sharing it. I just didn't want people acting like they owned something they didn't. Eventually, I started getting letters from residents, not the board. People who appreciated what I did. They said I inspired them. One man told me his daughter wanted to ask the board about more transparency in community spending. Another neighbor said she finally felt like someone had stood up to the bullies in suits. That one stuck with me. And then came the moment I didn't expect. One afternoon, the same HOA president who signed off on my $5,000 fine, Rick, showed up at my door. No appointment. No phone call. Just stood there with his hat in his hand. I opened the door slowly, expecting attitude. But he looked tired. Not angry. Just worn down. He said, "I didn't expect you to go that far." I said, "I didn't expect to be fined for sitting on a boat." We talked for about 10 minutes. He didn't apologize directly, but it was clear he knew they'd messed up. Maybe not just with me, but with a lot of people. And maybe, in some strange way, buying that lake forced them to wake up. After he left, I sat down at the edge of the water. Same place where all of this started. The sun was setting. It was quiet, peaceful, just like it had been before everything blew up. But now it felt different. Not because I had power, but because I'd earned something most people don't even think about until it's gone. Respect. Not just from others, but from myself. For standing up. For not backing down. For turning a ridiculous fine into a lesson nobody in that neighborhood would ever forget. It was strange how fast people started to shift their tone around me. Not long ago, I was just the guy who got fined for taking his pontoon boat out on a lake. Now, I was the one neighbors stopped to thank on the sidewalk. Some of them still didn't know all the details, but they knew enough. They knew the HOA had crossed a line, and someone had finally pushed back. I started to notice small changes throughout the neighborhood. The once intimidating notices that used to show up taped to garage doors were now being delivered with explanations. The board started hosting open forums, where people could actually speak without being shut down. One resident even said it felt like the HOA was suddenly trying to earn our trust instead of demand our obedience. Funny how fast people change when their authority gets questioned. Meanwhile, the lake took on a life of its own. People started calling it his lake. Like it was some inside joke everyone was in on. Going for a jog around his lake. They'd say, smiling, "Think he's out there today?" It wasn't about ownership anymore, it was about presence. I wasn't some invisible figure behind closed doors. I was just there, like everyone else, walking the trail, picking up trash when I saw it, saying hello to strangers. There was one day that really stood out. A group of kids had wandered down to the water's edge. They had a couple of inflatable rafts and were giggling, trying to push one out onto the lake. Parents stood nearby, clearly nervous. She looked over and saw me, then hurried up with this look like she was about to be scolded. Before she could say anything, I smiled and said, "They're okay. Let them have some fun." She looked stunned. "Really?" I thought. "I own it," I said. "Not a fan of pointless rules." She laughed nervously, then said something I'll never forget. "It's so weird. I feel like we're finally allowed to enjoy where we live." That hit me harder than I expected, because that's what it had all been about. This place we all called home had been controlled by fear for too long. Fear of doing the wrong thing. Fear of getting fined. Fear of being on someone's bad side. But now people were beginning to feel free. Not because the rules were gone, but because the people enforcing them had been reminded that they answer to the community, not the other way around. Some nights I'd walk around the lake alone, just listening. You could hear the difference. Less tension, more laughter, porch conversations, dogs barking, the kind of neighborhood sounds that used to be drowned out by whispers and complaints. A few board members remained, the quieter ones, the ones who never seemed to enjoy the power trips. They were different now too, more approachable, more aware. A couple even stopped to ask my opinion on small decisions. Not because they had to, but because they actually cared what someone else thought. I kept a low profile still, didn't want to become some accidental leader. But I did keep an eye on things. Not out of paranoia, just curiosity. I knew how easy it was for control to creep back in, masked as order or safety or what's best for everyone. I didn't want that to happen again. Not here. Because now, every kid who cast a line into the water, every parent who brought their toddler to watch the ducks, every jogger circling the shore, they weren't just enjoying the lake. They were experiencing what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. Not owned, not ruled, just shared, respected, real. You're not going to believe what happened to me. It started as a normal Saturday. The sun was out, the lake looked perfect, and I had the whole afternoon free. So, I took my pontoon boat out like I always did. Nothing fancy, just a peaceful ride. Music playing softly, cool breeze on my face. I wasn't bothering anyone, just enjoying the lake like I had for years. But the next day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the HOA. At first, I thought it was a newsletter or maybe a reminder about trash day. But no, it was a fine. A $5,000 fine. I blinked a few times just to make sure I wasn't reading it wrong. $5,000. For what? Unauthorized recreational activity on HOA property, the letter said. I stared at the paper, confused. I lived in the neighborhood. I'd used the lake dozens of times, so had plenty of other people. There were always folks walking their dogs near the shore, kids skipping rocks, some neighbors even fishing. No one ever said a word. No warning, no rules posted, nothing. And suddenly, I was fined $5,000? I called the HOA office right away. I kept it calm at first. I just wanted answers. I asked why this was happening and how long this rule had been in place. The woman on the phone sounded annoyed, like I was wasting her time. She said the rule was in the community bylaws. I asked when that changed. She paused, then told me it had been added recently. That was her word. Recently. I asked to see a copy of the updated bylaws. She told me to check the website. I went online and, sure enough, a new rule had been added just last month. It stated that personal boating on the lake was not permitted unless pre-approved by the HOA board. I had never received notice about this change. No email, no letter, no meeting. Nothing. I reached out to a few neighbors. Most of them had no idea this new rule even existed. What really got me was that I'd seen members of the HOA out there on the water just a few weeks earlier. Same lake. Same type of boat. No fines for them, of course. Just me. I started to feel like this wasn't really about the rule at all. It felt personal. Or maybe they were trying to make an example out of someone. I filed a formal complaint, hoping to get the fine reversed. They ignored it. No response. I followed up with emails. Still nothing. So I showed up to the next HOA meeting. I brought the letter, photos, even screenshots from their website showing how recently the rule had been added. I kept my cool and laid everything out. I asked them directly, why was I being fined when there was no notice? Why wasn't anyone else? They didn't have good answers. Just a lot of blank stares and awkward silence. Then the president of the HO, a guy named Rick, leaned forward and said, rules are rules. You should have known. That's when something clicked. I realized I was wasting my time trying to reason with people who didn't care about fairness. They weren't interested in doing what was right. They just wanted control. I left the meeting angry, but also more determined than ever. If they thought a $5,000 fine would make me back down, they had no idea who they were dealing with. And that's when I decided to dig a little deeper into this so-called HOA lake.